If you function with impeccable integrity, you will earn the trust and the affection because you're transparent, you're open, you're honest with your people.
Introducing Check Writers, a video podcast for people who want to help their employees, colleagues, and organizations flourish and succeed. I'm your host, Dakota Hebert, Chief Marketing Officer at Check Writers. Along with my co-host, HR Manager Felicia Corbeil, we'll hear from business leaders and pros who share captivating stories from their respective industries. Join us as we uncover their strategies and get unique inspiration for building great processes and experiences at your own organization. Check out and subscribe to Check Writers on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen and watch your favorite shows. Thanks for watching. You know that teacher or professor you always remember who would captivate a class with their wisdom and experience? The conversation we had with our next guest felt just like that. David Mersky has spent decades working with top executives at nonprofits around the world. His firm not only advises nonprofit leaders on how to create top-notch experiences for their donors and staff, but in many cases, he's developed these leaders and helped them land the top job. Listen to this episode to hear sage advice from David on how to onboard new staff so they never leave, the difference between leaders and managers, the number one trait leaders can't compromise on, and why you should model your succession plan after the British monarchy. I wanted to kick this off by just defining nonprofits, because I think a lot of people have in their minds, it's a charity, it's what they donate to. But the truth is there are so many organizations that fall under this nonprofit label. So what is a nonprofit and what types of organizations does that label include?
That's a great way to start because it contextualizes everything we're going to be talking about today. Nonprofits are not profitable. They have nothing to do with their P&L. It all has to do with the fact that if there were to be an operating surplus, that goes back into the business. It is not divided up among shareholders. There are probably 1.5, 1.6 million nonprofits in the United States, not counting religious organizations, not counting churches and synagogues and mosques.
Wow.
And that number rises and falls a little bit as the IRS cleans up the lists as to who is eligible. And the key is that when you get nonprofit status, you then can provide to individuals a tax deduction for any charitable contribution which they make, for which they receive no goods or services in exchange. And further, they get to do good work, and any operating surplus they have, which in business would be called profit, goes back into the business because nobody owns the nonprofit but the community or the members or what have you. All nonprofits over a certain level, usually over $25,000 or $50,000 a year in revenue. So right away you cut off a large number of very, very small organizations, file a tax return, even though they don't pay taxes. It's a Form 990, which enables people like us to see what they do, how they spend their money, where they receive their money. So these nonprofits are organized and function through this kind of governmental regulation. They include social service organizations like children and family services. They include youth empowerment organizations, boys and girls clubs. They include associations for like community centers and YM and YWCAs. They are associations of doctors and lawyers. The AMA and the ABA, the American Medical Association, American Bar Association, are all nonprofit organizations in that regard.
Then we're talking about schools and religious organizations too, right?
100%. I mean, virtually every school, from a preschool, if it is in fact even incorporated and organized that way, all the way through a university. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are sitting here in Northampton amidst, 5 major universities. They are all nonprofits and thus, meet the criteria which I outlined a moment ago.
Mm-hmm. So give us the lay of the land for these nonprofit organizations in terms of what their challenges are right now and in the years ahead, kind of the outlook.
So challenges are internal and external. Internal can be how do we deliver service when we have limited resources, human and financial. External, along comes the pandemic, and we have to shut down and pivot to deliver our educational activities differently. I have 4 grandchildren, 2 of whom are members of the high school class of 2020 and the college class of 2024. They had no high school graduation. They had no senior prom. And they went off to college and began their education sitting in their dorm rooms, or in one case, in their childhood bedroom, studying remotely. So they have to pivot. So there are those kinds of challenges. They have, in the medical field, urgent needs, but they're limited severely as to how many beds a hospital can have. They don't have enough nurses to provide care. They don't raise enough money. They don't get enough government funding. And all of these challenges have to be managed. And we're talking about, in those cases, $1 million and $1 billion organizations. In Massachusetts, Mass General Brigham, $3, $4, $5 billion a year operations. So the problems only increase in number and in size by the scope of the enterprise.
And what sort of challenges do you find with the nonprofits that you work with directly, and a lot of the ones that we work with too? And we're talking maybe between 50 and 250 employees.
So let's take an independent school as an example. It's a prep school. It offers both perhaps residential as well as day school education, and it has 400, 500 students in total, and it has a faculty and an administrative staff and a whole host of other people who are involved in delivering on the mission. They charge tuition. They also provide financial aid because they want to have a diverse, economically, socially diverse student population. Tuition doesn't even begin to cover all the costs. Where is the rest of the money going to come from? It comes largely in the form of philanthropy. And that's where we get involved, because we help a school like this structure their fundraising and development programs in such a way to maximize revenue at the same time as we minimize the cost of raising that money.
I think that's a great segue to kind of get into exactly how you help schools and nonprofit organizations achieve that. And I understand you've got quite the personal business journey from Wall Street, nonprofit leadership, and now you've got your own firm that specializes in working with these nonprofits, not only around the country, but around the world. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that journey a little bit, about your background.
Well, it used to be I would move from place to place. My kids didn't think I could hold a job. I actually began my career after graduate school as a congregational rabbi, mm-hmm. and did that for 3 years, and then went to work for an organization that was the parent body of all Reform Jewish synagogues in North America. And from there was recruited by a friend from that organization who was a volunteer leader to join him in an investment banking firm on Wall Street. And then 8 years later was recruited to come home to the Boston area. I was in New York at the time. Come home to the Boston area to head up fundraising and development for the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, which is Boston's Jewish Federation. And after 4+ years of that, I struck out on my own, started this business that's now 33 years ago, and was on the faculty at Brandeis University in the graduate school where we provided an MBA in nonprofit leadership and management. I have, in everything that I did, whether it was in a congregation, in an organization, in an investment bank, in my own business, tried to say, how do we engage and create relationships so that people feel that they can make a difference in this world through their individual activity and philanthropy, or their investments, which is another way. And we look at philanthropy as an investment because you're investing in the common good. And so that's been the through point in everything that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And so your business that you have now, talk a little bit about that. You work with people, nonprofits, on the philanthropy side of things, but also with some recruiting and retention strategies. So what are some things that you guys do?
So I started the business, and I had enough of international travel and national travel, and I created a business plan, and it was a single sheet on a 8.5 by 11-inch yellow pad, and I wasn't going to travel outside of Route 128 in Boston, which is the first highway circle. I think they now call it Interstate 95. Route 128 confuses people. But it grew, as things tend to do, and a partner joined, and we now have a team of 14 people altogether, and clients literally all over the world, throughout North America, the United Kingdom, and in Israel. In fact, also in Central Europe. We had a client last year from Poland. And we represent them in a variety of ways, helping them plan to raise money, helping them actually raise the money, helping them steward the relationships with their donors, and when it's necessary, helping them identify and recruit and train professional leadership to raise the funds that they need in order to deliver on their mission, vision, and values. We specialize in fundraising and executive search for nonprofits worldwide. Everything we do is to maximize revenue and deepen relationships with supporters of a mission-driven organization.
So what are some of the strategies you use when you go into a nonprofit for which a mission is so important because they need to really communicate that to the community, but also internally? How do you work with them a lot on their internal kind of culture and driving that mission throughout the organization?
Exactly right. We start with almost every one of our clients, wherever we are in the relationship, whatever they've asked us to do, and we say, let's take a step backwards, and we do an organizational and development assessment so that we get a baseline that we can say, okay, here's where you are. And among the questions we ask about their mission, vision, and values and how they developed them and when they were most recently updated. And we look at their governance structure and how volunteer leadership governs and how the professional staff functions and how they're organized and how they raise money and how they acknowledge and express appreciation and recognition for the funds which they raise, whether it's from individuals or corporations or private foundations. And even when we're doing an executive search, we take them through this kind of an assessment process so that not only can we represent the organization to the prospective candidates, but also we can show them ways by turning the screw a quarter of a turn, they might significantly increase their revenue and reduce possibly their expenses.
Mm-hmm. What does a successful nonprofit mission and culture look like?
I don't know that we can generalize in that respect, but I will say that it is something which engages people, and that's not just the public, the prospective donors and funders, but it's the volunteer leadership, and it's also the staff. And when we do recruiting, and recruiting for nonprofit, which is not different than when you need to hire people in the various departments of your own organization, you want people who are committed to what it is you're doing. I don't know what the mission of Check Writers is, but my guess is that you're here to facilitate other organizations manage their people and their processes around human resources, payroll, benefits in the most efficient and effective way possible so that they're able to focus on what their business is and not focus on these other things because you've got their backs. Well, the same thing with a nonprofit.
Maybe we should hire you. That's pretty
I
good.
was just thinking, Dakota and I worked so hard last year on coming up with a mission
And you
statement.
just did it in 20 seconds.
You're very kind.
So in terms of that recruiting and retention, there are some unique challenges with nonprofits, but with recruiting, talk about that process. Like in a perfect world, what should it look like for these nonprofits or even other organizations?
So, people, whether they are hiring officers in a corporate setting or in a nonprofit setting, have a lot of anxiety around making a mistake. And making a mistake in the hiring of somebody is among the most costly mistakes people can make. I mean, you know this. They're afraid that, they won't get the right person. And so what do? They go through and screen as many candidates as they can have and identify and interview and stress and do everything they can until they find the person who entertained them the most in that interview, right? And they hire the best interviewer or interviewee. When in point of fact, they need to be looking for somebody who can do the job, who is committed to the values of the enterprise, who will embrace the corporate culture and help you enhance it in whatever way that is. And that's as true for corporations, private corporations, or for nonprofits. You can't engage somebody as a development officer, somebody who's going to meet people and ask them to make significant contributions in support of what it is you do, if that person doesn't believe in a compelling and cogent way so that they can convey that to the donor and help the donor understand that the donor is the hero, not the fundraiser.
So how do you get people to believe that?
Well, part of it is that you hope that you bring people, as the recruiter, you bring people for the organization who already have an understanding of and commitment to the mission, at least in general. They are very involved in engagement of young people and youth empowerment. They're committed to education and making education accessible to all. They are devoted to finding a cure for cancer or for patient care. They come with something already, because in particularly the nonprofit world, where compensation is not what it is in the private sector, there needs to be a psychic compensation that comes from fulfilling the mission of this organization, and you have to start with that. If they don't come with that first, then you have a real problem. You can't just bring in a plumber when you really need a carpenter.
Right. So when you're at the executive level for your executive search endeavors for these organizations, what you're really looking for is evidence of almost a prior commitment to at least the pieces of the mission of that organization.
Yes, that's in an ideal world. Now, there are some cases where we have successfully found people who come from a totally different sphere, but have demonstrated leadership and management skills that are transferable. And they have the capacity to communicate in a way that they can as easily communicate the value of education as they can for healthcare.
One thing I read too, in going through your blog posts was that in an interview, people should be doing less talking and more listening, which I completely agree with. And so one thing that I find a lot of times is managers or directors will talk way too much when they're interviewing a candidate, and especially when you're trying to find a candidate whose mission aligns with your organization's. How do you coach some of those people who are interviewing so that they're not doing all of the talking?
Yeah, that's such a spot-on question. Here you have somebody who is exquisite as a manager in your conversions department. They are able to help and support the people who work with them to achieve your new clients coming on to check writers from wherever they're coming, either from no system at all or from an existing competitor. That doesn't make them skilled interviewers. And so we often spend a lot of time in the training of both the hiring officer and in a nonprofit setting, because nobody does anything alone, the search committee, particularly the higher up you get on the ladder, the more people have to have their fingerprints on the decision. And so we actually do spend time. I mean, sometimes we even use that old cliche, God gave you 2 ears and only 1 mouth. You should use them proportionately. And now we say, and you also have 2 eyes. Remember that much communication is nonverbal, and you have to be alert to that. And so we actually help people understand and role play with them how they should be listening more and speaking less. Now, that doesn't mean you're silent, but you need to be able to articulate what the job is, put out the question, come and listen to what they say, and listen actively so that you can then follow up. Conversations are not waiting for your turn to speak. Conversations are very active. It's a contact sport, after all, right?
That's a great analogy. Yeah. And of course, when you say that, I'm thinking, what am I going to ask next? No. But that
was that a dad joke?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
He is a dad.
He is a dad.
So, yeah, I love how you gave an outline of kind of the hiring and the placement process, which kind of leads us into the next perhaps overlooked component with a lot of organizations, which is the onboarding process. And I saw something you wrote about the importance of onboarding, and you pointed out that people will spend thousands of dollars and maybe even thousands of hours finding the best candidate, finding the ideal candidate. How do we get the person that's going to be the perfect match? They finally get the person, and they spend 1 day tops on onboarding.
Sure, they throw them into the deep end
Yeah.
and expect they're going to swim.
Yeah. So talk a little about that, because that's a problem across all industries. We see it all the time.
Absolutely.
And I think you also pointed out in that same article, like, you lose people after that 3-month period where you should have been onboarding them, integrating into the culture.
Right. So, first of all, I'm exceedingly flattered that you've done the kind of reading and research. I wish that the people for whom those were initially written had read them as well. But then if they did, we wouldn't have any work, would we? Yeah. Right?
That's true. Yeah.
I have ambivalence about that. Stephen Covey, who you may have remembered, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yes.
Whatever. And there's a whole industry around Covey and what he created. Had these 7 habits, one of which was to begin with the end in mind. So if you begin with the end in mind, you see a well-integrated, productive, successful, happy, engaged employee who is saying to his or her friends, I've got a great gig. They're looking for somebody. Would you like to come and apply for this job? Who go out and do your recruiting for you. I believe that you should plan the onboarding and have a detailed, systematic, disciplined process for onboarding before you begin the search for the position. Now, you can generalize it in one respect, and then you make it special for that position, that opportunity, for that hiring officer, for that team, whatever it has to be. That's the first thing. The process itself begins from the moment that the offer is made, how that person has felt through the interview process, and you extend the offer. You want them to accept that offer. Well, that's already the beginning of the onboarding. And as we said earlier, where retention of employees and staff is so critical, particularly in an environment where hybrid and remote are the way in which we function, and we don't have the chance to put our hands on them quite the way we used to, that we need to invest in their happiness, their satisfaction, their professional growth, from the day we make the offer to how we prepare them for the 2 or 3 weeks in advance of their start date to what we do with them on the very first day that they come here. I mean, I want the CEO, if it's that kind of company, or the executive director, if it's that kind of an organization, to be part of the onboarding team, to greet the new hire, to have breakfast with them that morning, to say, you know, I remember what it was like when I started a new job. I bet you have a little bit of butterflies. I want you to know I'm here for you. I want you to feel comfortable in coming to me anytime. And I want you to have a social lunch for them that day with their team members and others. Make sure that you get as much of the administrivia out of the way online in advance so that they don't get, you know, stuck in a cubicle filling out forms, even if it is done online. I mean, all those kinds of things. Make sure it's abundantly clear. Have their hiring supervisor meet with them and then explain their perception as well as share the views of what the job is, how success is measured, what the aspirations are, engage and listen to their concerns, their anxieties, if they'll share them. And some will and some won't, but make them feel at home. Welcome them to the family and meet with them regularly. The supervisor in a structured meeting every week, the supervisor every other week or every third week, the ED or CEO, if it's, you know, that kind of a hierarchical enterprise, at least, you know, once in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, just checking in. How you doing? What are your aspirations? What do you need to succeed here? What do you feel like we're doing really well? Because fresh eyes always help us. And what do you think we could be doing better? Those kinds of conversations say, I value you. I think you're important to the success of this enterprise. And we want you to share those ideas and thoughts and creativity, which we saw in you when we hired you. And that goes on forever. It doesn't stop in 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. It goes on forever because that's the core of the culture and values of the organization.
One thing I think about as you're saying all of those things is I can imagine managers thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is going to take so much time out of my day. It's going to take so much time to plan." Arguably, we could say you have to invest the time because it's going to be more time if there's turnover. But in terms of thinking about time, how much should a manager be devoting to that new hire, at least for them to plan? And how much time should they be taking to create this like onboarding plan?
I would suggest that in the development of the plan, it's not a single hiring manager's role, but you have at check writers several departments. You have marketing, you have sales, you have conversions, you have all of and bring the leadership and maybe some of the team members together and say, let's work together and create this onboarding thing. And let's take a few weeks, and let's put our ideas in and figure out how best to do this outside of the pressure of having to do it the night before this person is starting their job. So share the responsibility. Many hands make light the work, right? Second, what is a manager who supervises others to do but invest in their people? That's their primary job, because the success of that team is not done by the manager. It's done by the team as a whole. And measurement of success should be done in a collaborative way, not only by individual achievement. So you should anticipate as a manager, if you have supervisory responsibility, you're going to spend a couple of hours a week directly thinking about what this person is doing, needs, and how. An hour of that time is in face-to-face, probably half an hour preparing for it, half an hour debriefing yourself, maybe with another, notating what has been going on, and thinking about what do we do to make this person even more successful, more engaged, more satisfied than they currently are.
David, as you were talking about that, I started to think, well, we're using the term leaders and managers interchangeably. And in your line of work, have you have you noticed kind of there's often a difference between a very effective manager. You kind of hinted at it. Very effective manager maybe isn't a very effective leader, and maybe you need to engage your leaders at your organization to kind of have a heavier role in the onboarding than perhaps the direct report of the new hire.
Yeah, I think so. There is a distinction between leaders and managers, and there's a wide body of literature about this. The old academic in me is coming out and about to give you a reading assignment and a pop quiz. The leader is the person who is going to listen, distill, and share the values of the enterprise and the team, and be able to articulate that both internally and externally. A manager may be more narrowly focused on their team and their piece of the pie, as it were. Leaders have a broader responsibility across departments and teams. A manager may be focused just on theirs. Managers can become leaders, and leaders had better be good managers, because how do you supervise your managers if you don't understand what their role and responsibilities are, if you yourself haven't done that? When I taught at the university and we were preparing people to become leaders of nonprofit organizations, that's what the MBA was all about. And I took care of the fundraising and development people. I said, you're ultimately going to be the CEO of some kind of an organization. But right now, I'm going to treat you as if you were the director of development, and you had to be able to supervise the team that does direct response, and the team that does face-to-face solicitation, and the team that is handling donor relations, and the team that is doing the communications and copywriting and all of that. And you need to know all of those functions. You need to be able to do them yourself, not in great detail, but you need to understand what goes into writing a coherent thank you letter, right? And so that you can supervise others to make sure that that gets done. And then when you're the CEO, you're going to be supervising that person who you have been this semester, the director of development or director of advancement or whatever other euphemisms we use to talk about the chief fundraiser or chief philanthropy officer.
And with leaders and managers, they of course have to build loyalty with their employees. So what are some ways that they can work on doing that?
Integrity is the single most important thing that we all bring to whatever it is we do. If you function with impeccable integrity, you will earn the trust and the affection. I mean, because you're transparent, you're open, you're honest with your people. You share your concerns, you help them grow. That's how you earn their trust and get them to produce at the highest possible level.
You want them to follow you into the flame, right? That's the analogy. Something like that.
I don't know. We're recording this on the eve of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. As I was driving out, I listened to somebody who reminded us of the story of General Eisenhower, who was at that time the Supreme Allied Commander and in charge of all the planning for D-Day. And he went the night before. He had already given the go order. It was going to go the next dawn. He went the night before to meet with the members of the 101st Airborne Division, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. And he went to greet each of them and to thank them for their service and shake their hands. And he knew that one out of every two of them would not come back alive. But he earned their trust. He got them to go to the fire because he was there for them at that critical moment when they were about to face hell on earth.
Looking at what you do, how do you identify? You talked about leadership development, some of the exercises you go through with people who were on a track for nonprofit executive roles. What sort of traits, other than integrity, which obviously is a huge thing, but traits and qualities and habits have you found that maybe during the initial stages when you're working with somebody, or even ones that you've worked with for years, and you say, this is the profile. I can identify this now.
Well, there's so many different characteristics that we look for. Somebody who is, as we said earlier, an active listener, but an effective communicator, can speak in ways which people will understand, not having to use multisyllabic words and sentences that are more than 25 words, which I should listen to myself and take my own medicine. There's all of that. There are people who are not afraid of hard work, who will roll up their sleeves, who will get their hands dirty, who get in the trenches with their people and do the work with them, show them the way, who encourage the volunteer leader and the individual donor or the program officer or trustee of a foundation to trust them to use the resources they provide to achieve the mission of the organization, without which the world would not be as good a place, and without their support, they would not be able to do the work. We say to leaders, don't talk about all the things that the organization does and all the needs that you have. Ask your donor, what about this work is meaningful to you? And reinvent yourself in a way, and the organization, so that it is responsive to them and gives them a place where they can see they're going to do a really important piece of work. And all they need to do is engage, write a check, transfer securities, make a provision in their estate plan. Whatever method is not almost as relevant as they're going to save or change a life. You got to feel good about that. And you want to help them feel good that without their work, you would not be able to do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
As you're talking, what I'm thinking is recruiting people for, especially a nonprofit, is a lot like recruiting donors.
Oh,
There's so much overlap there.
Oh, my.
Because you're finding all these people who are dedicated to the mission, and then also from the when you're looking for donors, you have to ask them for this money, of course. So it's just kind of interesting, that overlap between the two.
Yeah, and in fact, we were talking earlier about staff retention and how important it is and how costly it is when you have staff turnover. Same thing is true about donors. I mean, the issue of donor retention is perhaps the single greatest challenge the nonprofit world faces. In the year ending December 31st, 2022, the last full year for which we have data, Americans contributed through individual gifts, estate plans, private foundations and corporations, $500 billion. $500 billion. The people who gave in 2023, and we hope would renew their support in 2024, less than half of them give again. The people who made a first-time gift in 2023, less than 1/5 of them, that is 19% actually, give again. It costs 4 to 5 times as much to acquire a new first-time donor as it does to renew an existing donor. It costs 3 times as much to replace a staff person as if they were to leave, because of all the efforts you have to go in terms of recruitment and hiring and onboarding and all of that. And so retention, whether it is of staff or of donors, is a major issue that nonprofits particularly are facing. Private businesses too. I mean, they want to retain their customers. They're going to pay a lot of attention to you. And I wish some of the airlines would pay a little bit more attention to their customers, because it's getting very unpleasant to travel these days.
it's funny. We talk about paying attention during the hiring or getting the donor. We talk about the onboarding, paying attention in the first couple months, maybe with your donor immediately afterward. But it's ongoing. It's got to be constant, because I think most people think employee engagement. I would guess that most businesses would be like, of course, my employees are engaged. Like, I have a good rapport with my team. We talk. I provide good benefits. I pay them. Like, why wouldn't I have a good? And yet there's so many blind spots with it. So what are some of the tips that you offer for ongoing engagement? What are some like actionable things that people could take away and say, I could implement that today without too much of a significant lift. It's just like I need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, so it's more than simply a holiday party or a summer picnic, which, depending on the organization, the company, the people, sometimes employees dread as much as they enjoy.
Did you know we have our summer picnic next weekend?
I was going to say.
I think
Did you hear that?
My invitation blew off the porch. But it's more than these kinds of things, which I guess are somewhat expected. It's the small personal touches. It's engaging with people regularly about such things as, how are we doing? How are you doing? What do you need to make this more effective, better for you? What tools do you lack? All those kinds of questions in which you engage, whether it is in a formal setting or even at the water cooler. I mean, we still have water coolers, right? And
I think so, yeah, right?
We do. I mean, I went through that magnificent space you have where there's a cafeteria and there's a refrigerator and probably a microwave and other things so people who bring their lunch can do that if they're not going out. And all of that is great. And, does management wander around? Does leadership wander around, say, hey, how are you doing? I mean, I was impressed. We went into what looked to me like a mailroom. You knew the names of both of the people in that space.
I used to work there when I was a teenager. It's
I don't
my favorite
doubt it.
place.
I don't doubt it.
Sometimes I want to go back there. It's
A little bit less stressful.
Yeah, probably.
I get it.
Not on Monday afternoons though, right? Tuesday afternoons
Monday
after
and
holidays.
Tuesday's not.
You wouldn't believe the checks coming off those things. A lot of people here do that though.
Yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people say to me. So even our president and our vice president, neither one of them are here today, but normally they're here.
Well, they knew I was coming. I wouldn't be here either.
They're normally down there getting coffee or chatting with people. And there's so many times when I conduct like exit interviews for employees. They're always so happy to say, "Oh, it's so easy to access people," which I think is really nice.
And this is a happy place. I mean, I walked in here and I was greeted so warmly by the people at the reception desk, and somebody who had nothing to do with the reception walked by and said, "Hey, David, how are you? Because you had my picture and my name on the board," and and all. That says something to the guest, to the person who is delivering something, to the person who works here. Those things that you now take for granted, that you don't think about. Somebody thought about them and said, we should be doing these things. And it's the same thing whether it's about donor retention or it is employee retention. It is constant engagement with them in a manner that feels genuine and spontaneous.
Thank you for all of those.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
so nice.
But as I'm listening to these items we're talking about, I can see why you were a college professor or how, but like a great one, because I would love to sit in your class, and I imagine that's kind of what a lot of your clients feel like too. Like this is just invaluable information, and you say it with like an energy that people feel like they can act on. So I'm starting to wonder, like some of your clients. Could you tell us a couple stories, one or two even, that you think this is one that really made an impression on me, and they implemented a lot of the things that we're talking about?
Yeah, we're working with a client right now that's a startup. I mean, it doesn't even qualify to be a startup yet, right? It's an idea. Mm-hmm. And they want us to raise money for them so that they can, but they have no idea how they're going to spend it, what the benefits of their existence, what the impact will be. And I said to them about a month ago, I think we should take a step back and let's think about what are the strengths and weaknesses that are internal to the leadership group that we've got here and the organization such as it is, and what are the opportunities and threats in the environment to our success and or failure? What is our vision for what we might aspire to be, and what impact do we hope to have? And so next Tuesday, we're going to have a meeting of their top leadership with our team to kind of work this through. They bought into the idea that they needed to do this, and that's very validating because, they could have as easily said, that's not what we want you to do. Go raise money. Don't bother us. Mm-hmm. And, of course, you can't do that. You can't possibly succeed. You can't sell check writers if you say, we have this idea about maybe we could help you with this or that. You want to buy that? Well, you've got to be able to show them, here's what we do, here's how it's going to save you money and time, which is money, and make your lives easier, make your employees more confident and happier because you're going to have all of the HR and benefits and compensation issues well managed in the most professional way possible. And you're not going to have to do that yourself. And that way you can focus on engaging with your employees and making them really happy.
I'm reminded of the show Shark Tank when people will go on and they'll say, here's my idea. Will you invest $1 million? And they say, but where's the idea? Where's the product? Where's the sales?
Right.
Where's the audience?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the topics that is another service I think that your business provides is succession planning, which I always think is a very interesting topic just because when I think of succession, I always think of I love history. So I think, okay, well, that's like a king, he dies, what's the succession plan? And then I think, do you ever find there's a negative connotation with succession planning? Because implicit in succession planning is going to be, hey, I'm not going to be in power. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be the manager, the president.
Be alive.
I might exactly. So how do you talk about a little bit about succession planning? What is it, and how do you get people on board to do that even if that hesitancy does exist?
So I start with the proverbial bus. I'm walking across the street, and the proverbial bus runs me down. And what happens to my company if that happens? And so we have a succession plan. We know exactly what will happen. We have all of the, things lined up in a way that will take care of that. We say to our clients, particularly when we're dealing with an executive search at the C-level, do you have a succession plan? Do you have a succession plan for your volunteer leadership? What happens if all of a sudden the chair of the board, becomes ill and can no longer function? What if the executive director's head is turned by some other organization and walks into the chairman and say, I'm leaving in 2 weeks? Now, that's a little radical. I mean, it's perhaps more than it need to be. But we think that every organization should have in place a succession plan. And there are a variety of components that make up a good succession plan. One, you have to have an up-to-date position description. I mean, that CEO may have been there 27 years. The last time there was a job description for that was when that person was hired. The world has changed a wee bit since then. The organization has changed. Its scope has changed. Maybe that needs to be looked at on a very regular basis. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there needs to be a clear understanding of how the organization functions and governs itself and what its opportunities are and what kind of person there is. All of that should be done. And you should have a search plan. If you needed to replace it, not saying that you have to implement it, and and an onboarding plan, all ready to go in the God forbid moment. You mentioned, what if the king dies, what happens next? Well, if you think about it, we've had an experience in relatively recent times. The longest serving monarch in the history of, I think, the world, right? Queen Elizabeth II dies, and it is, immediately, God save the king. And Charles becomes king, Charles III, instantly upon the death of his mother, even though he's yet to be crowned. There has been no coronation, but it is seamless. And talk about planning. It's extraordinary. They have funerals lined out. They know exactly what's going to happen every step of the way. And they spend a lot of time and energy because continuity is critical. Well, if it's critical for the United Kingdom, even when the king or queen, the monarch, is not the chief, is not the chief of state, because the prime minister is, how much more so for the nonprofit organization, which has hundreds, if not thousands, of people who depend upon it to be able to get a meal, or to have health care, or to have a place to go after school that's safe. That's continuity that needs to be assured as well. And I guarantee you that there isn't 1 in 100 organizations that have planned for the moment when that continuity would be disrupted.
British monarchy been around for over 1,000 years, so probably a pretty good place to get some succession tips. They've only had a couple
I don't know
blips.
that they'll return my call, but I could try.
Right.
Well, even just as you were talking about it, I was thinking about our teams, and I know we think about it in terms of like this broad, like if the owner, the president, or the founder, or a board member, but it's really, you can even think about it as small as like your team. Even if you have a team of 4 or 5 people, the manager of that team or one of the people on that team, if something happened to them, even just something as simple as getting a new job, there should be some sort of plan for what happens when they leave.
100%.
We also like to use the analogy that people win the lottery and quit instead of get hit by a bus. It just makes it a little
softer.
more brighter.
Yeah. I don't play the lottery, so that never enters my consciousness.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Felicia, about you got to drill it. It's not just the top.
No.
It's each department.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Felicia.
David, tell us a little bit about your business in terms of like where people can find you, the core services,
Sure.
website, LinkedIn, all that stuff.
Right. So as I said before, the essence of our business is that we specialize in fundraising and executive search for nonprofits worldwide. We have a website, merskyjaffe.com. I assume the Chiron will have the title.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right. And that we're on LinkedIn as Mersky, Jaffe Associates, individually as well as for the firm. We have virtual teams that come together for each project. So while there are 14 of us all together in the firm, 3 may be working over here, and 2 of those 3 may also be working over here with different organizations, depending on what has to be done. So we have a client in Cambridge, Massachusetts that 2 of us are working on. We have a client in El Paso, Texas that 2 different people are working on. And we have clients in New York that 4 other people are working on. So we come together and apart as clients come on. We have a core principle that says that one of the 2 partners are involved in every project from beginning to middle to end. So we therefore have relatively few clients at any one time because there are only 2 partners, though now we've brought on a managing director who we treat in the same way. So we now have 3 principals in the firm. That's the succession plan.
I was going to say, that's a good succession plan.
Yeah, right. And she's of a completely different generation. And we are, constantly talking about what we're doing so that, everybody is aware of what's going on. We're a small shop, by design, and we give a lot of hands-on service. The other thing that I think is important is that we don't watch the clock. We're not like lawyers who bill by 6-second or 6-minute increments. We give you a project-based fee so that you know what your exposure is, and then we say, forget the clock. We want you to engage with us whenever you need us. And you do the same thing. If somebody needs your service because they're running into a problem, you're there for them 24/7 in one way, shape, form, or another. Whether it's online or it's with a live person or what have you. We want to give people that same comfort, because we found that when we would bill by the hour or whatever, clients were reluctant to engage. And that's not good for them or us. And so that's the way we work. We do coaching of C-level people, frontline fundraisers. That's all in service to helping them generate more revenue from deeper relationships with donors and funders.
That's great. Thanks so much, David. I learned a ton in this talk, and I think our audience will be able to take away a lot of stuff too. We really appreciate you coming on.
I'm happy to have been here. Thanks so much for the
Thank
opportunity.
you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Check Writers. Be sure to follow us on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you view your favorite podcasts. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll continue to uncover the secrets behind successful organizations.